All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our November 3rd, 2022 MBTC meeting. I'm Panic Goodrich, our chair for tonight, and I'd like to first note that we're starting at 7:02 p.m. We are live streaming the meeting, so we ask that commissioners speak up, so those participating electronically and listening to YouTube can clearly hear what's being said. Tonight, we have 4 commissioners participating electronically. Mr. Clemente is participating electronically from Loudon due to medical reason. Mr. Alcorn is participating electronically from Fairfax County due to medical reason. Mr. Bell is participating electronically due to personal reason for travel. And Mr. Poole is participating electronically as she lives more than 60 miles out from our location and is participating from the we also have 2 additional microphones on the table that help with the audio. As always, we ask that you keep table something and site which in general to allow our online participants to hear. And those 2 additional microphones are basically another way of saying hot mic everybody. So I believe our commission secretary has already confirmed we have 4. Yes. Good. So go ahead and get started. Couple of opening remarks and a reminder for the commission tonight. Next month, executive committee meeting will have a number of agenda items related to the budget, our financial statements on it, and our executive director's performance review. So as such, we'll be starting the executive committee meeting at 5:30 instead of 6. So we need to adjust the calendar to do so. Make sure that we can clear all our business before the full commission meeting. Also, on a related note, please complete and return the executive director's performance review survey to me. I think I put the 18th. It's before Thanksgiving. If you didn't get it, please let me know. And also, thank you to Past Chair Crystal for the assist on questions and a couple of items. Also, hope everybody's had a chance to review the agenda tonight. Ms. Mattias, did we receive any phone call? All right, great. So we can move on to our next item, which is the minutes. Everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? Any comments, concerns, issues, comments? Okay, so motion. Ms. Bagley with motion second with Ms. Barbie. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
An aye from Mr. Clemente.
Aye.
Aye from Mr. Alcorn. Mr. Rule does not want to abstention. I was going to ask for abstention. Yes, Mr. Meyer, Mr. McKay, Ms. Crystal, and myself. Any other abstentions on this? Okay, so item number 3, we have the 2023 meeting schedule to approve. Normally, we look only with February meeting originally to align with the BACO and EML day, but we were recently informed that this will actually take place 2 weeks earlier in January. So we are recommending to keep our February meeting here in Virginia. I would also like to note that the Virginia Transit Association is planning their annual Transit Day in Richmond on Monday, January 3rd, and all commissioners are invited to participate for the day, as well as the evening reception planned at Richmond Station. Not with the main location, it's a very nice plan. Staff is also recommending that we cancel our April 6th commission meeting. We have multiple jurisdictional budget hearings and meetings in April. Staff will coordinate any anticipated commission actions to coincide with March with the meetings to make up for that's the April. And I believe the last note on the schedule, the December 7th meeting is candidate to be held as a virtual meeting. This will be helpful for staff as next year's legislative forum is expected to be held the same week on that Monday, December 4th. We can decide, of course, next fall if we want to keep it all virtual, be in person, some type of idea. With the new FOIA legislation, MBTC can now hold at least 2 all virtual meetings each calendar year, as long as they're not back-to-back meetings. But again, we ultimately decide if we want to do a virtual.
I just noticed that the September 6th is a Wednesday. Is that intentional? Should be all Thursdays.
It's a minor common typo. Thank you, Mr. Henry.
Today is that the 7th.
Information.
I can be looking at the wrong year on mine, but it looks like.
Wednesday.
That's 7th, so we got it. Should be 7th. So with the AM edit to September 7th, then we can.
Bring it to Ms. Pache. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Exceptions? Online,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn, Mr. Clemente? Motion passes. On to item number 4, community choice program. So tonight we have 2 action items with community choice. First is to authorize staff to open the I-95 and I-95 community choice FY 24-25 call for topics and to adopt minor changes to the community choice technical evaluation process. We have with us Mr. Owen. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. We do have 2 community choice items on the agenda this evening. First being to open the call on projects for fiscal year 24-25 funding. So last month, I briefed you on the outlines of this funding round. We have roughly $45 to $42 million available for projects. We're encouraging capital project approvals. We will be opening our application portal. That application to the end of the day, January 7th, Friday, January. And funded projects will be included in the next 6-year approval program that the CTP is expected to adopt. So we are expecting very strong interest in the funding this time around. I think we've been trying to get the word out that there is a significant amount of funding available, and we're kind of firing on our applicant page again. Looks like there's going to be a lot of interest in this fund. It's a pretty important proposal. So it'll be a pretty exciting round. PRTC is taking up a comparable resolution this evening. They of course said it will roll with us over the active 595 program. And in the interest of keeping this brief, I will wrap up there on the first action and have you take any questions.
thank you, Mr. Owen. Any questions for Mr. Owen? We have a motion to authorize the executive director to issue FY 2025 all projects to the implemented by the back door. Mr. McCabe, with the motion, Ms. Fisher with the second. Any other further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
It's all voting aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Then we also have,
Yes, so the second item is approval of minor changes to our technical evaluation process. These are contained resolution 18487. We reviewed these last month as well. Basically, they are pretty minor. They would put more of the possible points to measure more elements of our evaluation process. It also introduced equity consideration in the process. It would also streamline the process for. So this process would apply in both corridors until such time as the commission, as well as PRTC, 95 corridors. So keep that short too, and happy to take the question. Any questions for Mr. Lowe?
I have a motion to adopt the community choice technical evaluation process. Mr. McCabe, motion. Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Mr. Clemente, aye, Mr. Alcorn. Any names or extensions? Thank you all so much. Motion passes. Moving on to item number 5, our WMATA Virginia board members. We have a report from a lot of board members and the chair of the Vermont committee. Following that. Okay, before you all.
Right, first, in case you haven't heard by now, Silver Line in Phase 2 extension is opening on May, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was thinking it's November 15th, Jeff just joked on the stage.
Please, everyone, please note that the Ashburn Metro stop is now at the top of the metro system as you look at your card.
It's not actually going to be.
Now, we weren't gonna say that.
So yeah, we are looking forward to that, obviously, and so is the region, and you know, we'll have a celebration that day. I think, Greg, we're starting at 11, is that confirmed? I think, Greg. Secretary Buttigieg will be there, as other dignitaries. It'll be held right there at the airport station itself. That's the plan anyway, so more to come on that. Also, I think Greg and has got some little swag that they have, little luggage tags, things like that, so. Anyway, but it is very exciting, obviously, for the two counties, the potential out there, and getting more people on Metro. Related to that, earlier today, the board received a summary of service restoration on rail and bus and the return to 7,000 series cars. This allows us for more reliable service at a pivotal time as the station south of National will reopen this weekend. On the 6th, and of course, as you all know, Silver Line is on the 15th. Throughout November, Metro will gain additional trains to reduce crowding, and by December 5th, Metro expects peak headways to reduce crowding. On the bus side, Metro store service frequency on routes that were temporarily reduced in September due to operator shortages, and Metro will continue to keep services operated. So we had a pretty thorough update on that, and I would like to say, I think I may have mentioned it once before, just getting that Silver Line extension project completed and work with the airport, Senator King, and Senator Warner, you know, were very helpful with also working with getting the two groups together and coming to a resolution and a path forward to bring back the 7,000 series cars. So I would like to publicly acknowledge that. A little bumpy getting there, but we got there, and at least we do have a path forward that would be based on data. And yeah, so that's good. And lastly, from my perspective here, that's got some things which I want to share. But the board appointed Renee Douglas as the Inspector General today, officially confirming that. Renee has been in the active role for the last 6 months. You know, he and his team have done a great job. He will have a 3-year term with automatic extensions for a successful 1-year term. Unless the board that they will not be so there's some security there. Of course, the work forward. His entire office was there today, which is nice to see. And I also want to mention, and I mentioned at the board meeting today, there was an editorial with some of you, or a local opinion piece that was written by the Federal City Council that really wasn't very factual. And one of the things they mentioned was the Inspector General and the board's inaction left the impression that this office was just sitting there languishing for another 6 months. You know, that was really wasn't fair. It would take all of like 1 minute and 1, maybe 2 clicks to look at the IG website and see all the work that they have done in the past 6 or 7 months. And you know, it's really been quite a lot, and a lot of work has been done in reorganizing the office and everything. Interaction with a lot of staff, and so I really and the board, you know, sort of took exception to that. If someone has the privilege of having that opportunity to have a piece like that in paper, particularly for the record for this region. You would think that they would, do some research and put something out there that's happening. So wanted to just all let you know that the work of this office continued. In fact, I think we can say maybe at a higher level. So yeah, it was really. So I just wanted to let you know.
Mr. Schlemmer, just for those that don't know, the mayor was an external person.
No, he was already basically in the deputy role.
Yes, he was leading the investigation.
Yeah,
I do office under the previous IG, so, but now he's obviously the IG, so it's a good segue. One of the IG functions is to help oversee the audit process of Avada. Board received our official audit report today. It was a clean audit. I say that because a lot of people like to cast aspersions at Metro and its finances, and I think some of that point of view is outdated. Under Dennis Seagate, who just departed to go back to Chicago, where he's from, they really did turn around that process, and there's been several clean audits in a row now. So that's good news. I mean, we don't want to see that. It's our expectation, but I think it does bear noting. So November 1st, Metro began to issue citations for fare evasion. Hopefully you saw all the messaging that led up to that for the month of October. It was kind of a soft approach to reminding folks about the need to pay if they're going to be on the system. But we are now ticketing. They're going to use discretion in doing so. Certainly the first interactions are still reminding customers that they need to pay. And obviously, when it comes to children and things like that, there's going to be some leniency and some discretion being exercised by the officers. But given our budget situation, which I'll update on in a minute, I think the region really expects Metro to collect all the fares that they're supposed to be before we turn around and start asking for more money. So, we have some money potentially we're looking at in this year's coming budget, this sort of money that we're losing partly for fare evasion that we're now accounting for as part of our closing the gap. It's not a huge number, but it is a number, and it's something that we need to continue to make progress on. So that's happening now. Speaking of the budget gap, so we continue to have public discussions about it. It's 184.7 million for fiscal year 24, which is the one that will start next July. We have sort of, I don't want to call them easy, but we have ways to get that number down to about 146 million without really feeling any pain. A lot of that's through vacancy savings and internal operations. So we can pick up about 40 million. The rest of that we're going to have to pick up through other means. The biggest thing on the table, and staff did outline some of the options, is using basically transferring preventive maintenance between budgets, capital and operating budget. Not doing preventive maintenance, but looking at which budget it's sitting at. It's been stuck at 60 million for 6 or 7 years. And there's a lot of new federal money coming in now for preventive maintenance. So the board has asked for detailed information about exactly which items that we're talking about. And also what some other systems are doing. We have seen that there are other systems that are using a much higher number in that space. That's something we can kind of do once. Frankly, the bigger issue is subsequent fiscal year when deficit grows to 500 million up to $1 billion in 10 years. So we can look at this for this year. I think the plan is to sort of handle it internally without going and asking for a lot of new money from the region. But going forward, we're going to have to have a different conversation. We also looked at service and fare concepts that may or may not come into play for the FY24 discussion. I think I had reported previously, we were interested in looking at a zone concept. We were interested in looking at simpler fare system. I think the zone potential is not necessarily simpler. A lot depends on exactly where you draw the zone lines. We did receive a presentation on that. I think that some of the things that were presented
as sort of staff proposals. I think people in this room would not like very much because you would be traveling within zones, you know, within, say, the jurisdiction of Arlington County, and therefore the fare would be higher because you're going between zones. A lot just depends on exactly where you put that map and how you set it. Another option is to keep the distance-based system, but to simplify it. You know, one thing I have learned is our formula today is not solely based on how far you're traveling on the system. There's multiple factors, including how far the crow flies and how far you're traveling on the system. And there's a base fare built in. So you get some pretty odd numbers out of that. You could sort of peg that at 25-cent increments, or we could just look, generally speaking, at ways to try to simplify it. So that's another option. We asked a lot of questions about what a flat fare looks like and what that number would need to be in order to sort of equalize our revenue. I think it was in the $3 to $4 range. Frankly speaking, it would be really impossible to implement for an organization that doesn't already have it because of the Title VI equity analysis that you have to go through when you're making fare policy changes. We would not be able to pass muster with that type of equity analysis from FDA. And so that's kind of off the table for us. It was an interesting exercise to see what that would look like, but it probably wouldn't work. Then there was kind of a service discussion, and so the staff has gone through and looked at relatively easy to accomplish, but big value sort of changes in service. Putting in more service in certain corridors that are seeing higher ridership. I'm not going to go over each of those proposals, and we'll have time to do that because I believe the general manager will end up proposing this as part of his budget. But you know, there are things such as red line turnbacks, which have been on the table before but not implemented. Orange line would see more service in the proposal. Kind of the corridor that includes the stadiums and the airport would see more, or sports venues would see more service. The net cost of all that is roughly $20 million. So that's an add-on on top of the existing budget deficit. So, you know, one of the ways that we may approach that discussion, and one of the reasons I'm bringing it up now is those could be considered exclusions to the 3% subsidy cap because it is new service. So the 3% cap, which we're governed by, means as we're asking jurisdictions on an annual basis for more money, it's limited to 3% in terms of what that growth could be. That's not working out great for us now because inflation is like 8%, and we're feeling a lot of pressure on wages and those sort of things like everybody else is, but we're limited to 3%. There are exceptions in that, and one of them is for new service. So what I have kind of said is I think we should present these proposals, and then we should have a regional discussion about the merit of them and whether there is a desire from the subsidy paying jurisdiction for us to actually do this. And we should be very clear about what it would cost and what we would get for it. Candidly, 20 million spread around all the jurisdictions, including Maryland and districts, may not end up being a huge number for everybody individually. And we may find that there is a lot of value in that. I mean, the general manager, I think, is very excited about these because he believes that growing ridership is essential for us long term, and he thinks that these are things that would do that. We did have a discussion about hours of operation. The concern that Paul and I both have brought up on that is the maintenance hours. That kind of led to a second conversation and a more detailed discussion that we kind of backed into about how WMATA conducts maintenance and the amount of wrench time needed. It is the analysis of the new management team that we are not very efficient, and that our setup and takedown is taking much longer than it does in comparable systems. So they are working on a proposal that would streamline how maintenance is conducted and reduce the number of downtime hours required for to optimize wrench time. And if that were to happen, then we could potentially look at extending the hours of operation, at least on weekends or things like that. Typically, that doesn't produce a lot of riders, but it is something that always gets a lot of attention. So that's kind of where we're at from a process standpoint. The GM's budget's gonna come later than it normally does, it's gonna come in December. Partly because we've had such a transparent discussion about what all these numbers are, so, you know, typically around November, all the jurisdictions start seeing numbers for the very first time. At this point, we've already put numbers out there since September. But, you know, they're still kind of fine tuning what some of these proposals will be. So that'll come in December. I think, you know, we'll go to public hearing, we'll want input on some of these service proposals. We'll do a deeper dive on the preventive maintenance, capital versus operating discussion, see what our comfort level is. You know, the only way, you know, I said this before, the only way to really impact revenue and expenditure is through headcount. And we are in a situation in fiscal 24 where we will run out of the federal money, and that's why we have the deficit, but not until at least midway through the year, which means the rules that govern use of that money are still in place, meaning that we cannot reduce headcount. So that, you know, reducing service does not really save much money when you can't reduce headcount. It's really marginal savings, it's not worth it. So that's why that's not really on the table at this point. It just doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not a big savings. And of course, I don't think it's something that anybody in the room wants to do. It's just a question of what's necessary to develop. But so happy to take questions.
But one other thing I just want to make sure people are clear on, when Matt mentioned preventative maintenance and looking at that. But it is not stated good repair. This is-
Yeah, these are,
lines,
yeah, there's a lot of
repair,
categories.
there's projects that are on hold still continue.
And they are categories in which the FDA does permit use of these funds in that category.
That actually was what I, question for, so I was trying to understand, because I know we talked about this with the concept of the infrastructure, though, right, there were new competitive grants, there was new formula funds.
Yeah.
Right, so it's a challenge, but I was thinking about these solutions, you were saying that this is kind of a one-time thing. Of bringing some of those preventative maintenance into the capital budget.
It's not a one-time thing in terms of once you move it, you can keep it there, but if you're trying to close a budget deficit. You
I
can only really do that when you keep, unless you keep moving more and more money, then it turns into a problem. Yeah.
Because, those are over 5 years, and those new capital funds, so it seems like there are potentially some ability to. It seems to me, right, the Feds have made it very clear that they have absolutely no interest in paying for the operations of transit system, and it would behoove us to figure out how to get as much of the operations. Fall in the capital budget.
Yeah,
So it sounds like that's-
you're exactly right, and that's what we're thinking, and we're also, trying to think a little bit outside the box. Feds may not be interested in funding the transit system, but there may be a lot of interest, particularly after the next election, about funding safety and security. And we have a police department, as it turns out, and it's funded out of our operating budget. So are there ways to receive some help perhaps? So the general manager is thinking along those kind of lines as well, but you're right.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate Matt, your presentation. I remember had budgets years past, there were conversations almost exactly about the same set of functions.
You're right. Yeah.
For Matt, I think the only thing I would approach with caution is we have to understand that turnbacks reduce service too. So it might be new service, but it's coming from someone. So if we say that, we're looking at increasing services in lines that have heavy users. We are also saying that lines that don't have heavy users are going to get a reduction in services. Saying the same thing, in part, that's probably to me because we do have some lines that underperform. And if you reduce service in those areas, and one of the reasons why some of those lines are underperforming now is because the service is great. And so it has an effect on those lines that further marginalize something.
So here's the two things. The only line that they showed us turn back on was the red line. And it would be, so this is a very unique situation because our level of service now is low because we're not running budgeted service or close to it. What they're proposing is to get to budgeted service, so everybody gets an increase in service. And then even on the red line, if they have the turnbacks, they actually would further improve the service, reduce the headways, but the the central core would get. An even greater improvement. But the proposal, as it was stated, said that no line would receive less service than what was budgeted in 23. So, I mean, obviously, we're gonna have to scrutinize this. But it's because we weren't running our full complement of service. And I should add, today we ran 24 7,000 series training, which is the most we've run, so that's good. But we have so much to grow because we have to get all the training back. But it is only also on the red line, so
Yeah,
not
no,
Virginia.
I appreciate that. I would say what you. Instead. So
Absolutely right.
drawing the conclusion, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you get made older. Attention.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure that it's taking off that. consideration. So in the normal time, right, you're thinking city.
Yeah.
But after what we've been through over the last couple of years, we're getting your ridership numbers, there's other expectations sometimes.
You're absolutely right, but I will say, even before COVID. It troubled me a little bit that the outer stations on the red lines were getting the frequencies that they were getting, because when you look at those station by station ridership numbers. We were seeing greater ridership on our orange line station. But Maryland was very resistant to turn back. So I just was looking at it from the standpoint of, those are similar, I'm talking about the outer stations now on the red line, there's suburban stations. Do they really need more meant frequencies? Especially when you look at other parts of the system. So I actually think if this were done correctly, it could be a more fair for us. It could be a better.
I think that's partly true, I think also once the door is open. So there are other things we be cognizant of, for those of us who have stations in the outer area.
Yeah.
Aren't on the red.
Yeah.
Turnbacks typically mean that they're without less service. And if that becomes something that predominates the conversation, then at some point, there's a limited number of trains, a limited number of track time. At some point, outer stations are getting less service. And for those of us that represent conversations, something always go further to caution. And I think you guys know that.
Yeah, we've got it, Jeff, when Redline has, whatever 4 minute, and everyone else has 12 or 10 or 12. And we're crowded, closer in and on other lines, they've got something.
Yeah, but I really think it's particularly important that we don't degrade service on the silver line as it's starting. Like, it's gonna be tempting, I mean, we all know when that starts.
One of the things I'm worried about.
The ridership numbers aren't gonna be great, I mean, they aren't when we start, so. We're gonna have to show restraint there and we have to give it time to let it grow, so I'm with you.
One of the things we did, another significant thing happened today in Alexander Yard. So, big yard, a lot of things out there. Jim and I were out there last week. It's good.
I just wanted to say, I recall the predecessor, where we were going along, and plan the solar line.
I have a question about, I thought, but now I'm trying to find it in the material, there was a reference to making parking free as a, there was order, is there anything? Like, what is it in the notes, there's some discussion about like ongoing, the thought there that you make the parking free, then you'll make it up on the private or.
Well, there was parking free. Well, during the shutdown.
Right.
But that has not been proposed as a 24
Okay.
service enhancement or initiative. I think the challenge with it would be the number of private garages you have on the new park system. That there's some contractual stuff with the counties, and if you reduce parking to 0 on the metro station, you really make those projects in trouble from a debt service repayment standpoint. So I don't think that would be.
Okay, that was really only tied to. So the
Shutdown.
Okay.
other questions? Well, as always, thank you to our group two board members for all the work, especially today, since I was really.
Oh, yeah, we should mention. Strategic plan, so that's what we were doing today. Strategic transformation plan. Well, it has a new name. It has a new name. We're not gonna, no. But I think the plan is to have it in front of the commission potentially next month. We will talk more about that, but we want to start sharing it with stakeholders. This is like a really detailed plan. This isn't like a, one of these kind of high level, isn't this nice type of thing. This is like, and Randy is planning on using this as sort of a tool to completely shape the workflow and then potentially the organization itself in terms of how it's structured. So there's a lot of weight attached to this. It has, I would say, short, kind of medium, and then some longer term things in it, centered around 4 buckets. So they can very neat. Yeah, it's really detailed. There's a lot of metrics in there, specific performance type of things. If you're like a transit nerd, Kate, I think you'll.
Share that with others.
Of course. Yeah.
It's like there'll be lots for us to bite off between next week. All right, so we're gonna go on to our next item, which is the report from our WMATA committee chair, Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have a very brief report and then we're going to get a staff presentation. So at the last WMATA committee meeting, the committee received an update on NBTC staff research on what we're calling peer transit agency operating funding. So these were the agencies that were reviewed: BART, CTA, LA Metro, MARTA, NBTA, the New York MTA, PATCO, PATH, and the St. Louis Metro. And staff looked at their FY 2022 budget and dedicated operating funding sources, as well as looked at agencies that have an interstate compact similar to WMATA. So that was the group that they looked at. The research is intended to complement NVTC's WMATA operating funding and reform working group, which is a strategy of the 2022 report on the performance and condition of WMATA, and focuses on examining and developing options for a new financial operating model for WMATA. So that was discussed at the committee. The committee also reviewed NBTC staff's proposed strategies to reduce the growth in costs and to improve efficiencies for the 2022 report on the performance and condition of WMATA. So we worked with staff to streamline those strategies. And you'll see in the presentation that's coming right up, and there's a draft of the introduction strategies and dedicated capital funding chapters in your meeting materials. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Alan and Renetta to give a presentation on the report.
So as a reminder, the 2018 and the conference legislation, we created dedicated capital funding for WMATA, also included a legislative mandate for NCTC to produce an annual report to the governor and general assembly on the performance and condition of WMATA. And NCTC tasked the WMATA committee to provide guidance to staff to update the report annually. So this table shows the structure of the report. The structure of the report, which is guided by legislation. The introduction gives context to the background of the FY 2024 operating gap, as well as highlighting the service. And we'll also talk about that a little bit deeper on the next slide. The first chapter is the strategy to reduce the growth in costs and improve operating. Followed by reduce the dedicated capital engine, which this is specifically within the $154 million savings, but the $500 million in annual deficit. And the last one is the focus on safety and liability, and financial performance as well as wider risks. That can something that as well as model. Next slide, please. So the introduction provides a framework for the model for the long-term operating funding gaps, focusing on the model threshold operating in the pandemic. Because as you can see on the graphic, after the federal COVID aid is adopted in FY 2024, the gap continues to grow, even with ridership at 100% recovery, the funding gap is still 5%. The introduction also lays out structural economies that flow in the operating budget, focusing on customer revenue, cost, and subsidy structure. And this is related to a number of different factors like the client sales off revenue and subsequent increases in jurisdictional operating subsidies. About 70% of the model operating expenses related to personnel as well as inflation. And these challenges have been accelerated by the pandemic. And this is the foundation that we're going to make the groundwork for as we go into the strategy. Next slide, please. So the first strategy of the report is to rebuild customer confidence, and this is first through continuing the return of the 7,000 business training service, which we know the WMC. This strategy also focuses on safety in 2 lenses. So it focuses on safety from the physical perspective, making sure customers feel safe, riding the system, as well as safety, performance safety culture within WMATA as an organization. The next strategy is to import fare payments in form of the account system. And the core of the strategy is pretty much that everyone should pay their fare and that there needs to be some enforcement. And again, this is something that we see that WMATA is already beginning to take action on. This strategy is primarily framed around public safety and security, as well as the welfare of transit operators. We've also included that jurisdictions should offer low income fare payments to address equity. Next slide, please. The third strategy focuses on implementing a simple and convenient fare structure. So this includes looking at concepts like a flat horizontal fare, while also recognizing that there are revenue and ridership implications to these concepts. It also calls for simplifying the customer experience to make sure that it's easy for customers to pay their fare and manage transit benefits. And lastly, it also calls for integrating local and regional transit providers into WMATA's fare structure and fare payments. The fourth strategy is to increase non-fare revenues from real estate and advertising, with a strong focus on WMATA to continue its joint development efforts to gain ridership and revenues from fares and real estate. And the fifth strategy is to manage labor costs. And this is focused on amending the Road Act, and this is something that we also mentioned.
So this would be some of the first 5 recommendations we have. There are 7 total. This year we're taking a little bit different tack with the guidance from the audit committee. We have 2 different recommendations that are actually directed at NBTC to dive a little bit deeper into some of the work we're doing. Can you go to the next slide? The first one is to explore the implications of local transit agencies taking over Metro Bus service in Northern Virginia. One of the conversations we've been having for the last several meetings in the WMATA committee is talking about that balance of Metro Bus versus local system. It is a continuum across Northern Virginia. Some of them range from the 60-40 split one way or 40-60 split the other way. Some jurisdictions don't have their own bus system, but rely exclusively on Falls Church. While we don't have any Metro Bus service, so it's a little bit of a mix across there. So in order to examine some of the potential opportunities and ask the question, are there potential cost savings down the road in the region for individual jurisdictions as that balance shifts potentially over time? We want to take a look at some of those factors that may be important to look at to folks that don't have quite a bit. Some of the areas we're going to focus on are different policy structures that are there, funding, capital facilities, governance, labor, and several other considerations to follow. The idea of this white paper is to look at what those considerations are, what are the opportunities, the pros and cons. It's not necessarily to come out with recommendations to do something, it's basically guidance document for folks to make well-informed decisions, because as I mentioned earlier, 70% of the laws operating efforts labor, and they're not going to shift that.
things that include savings and other revenue jurisdictions. As we do with everything here at METC, we want to make sure the work we're doing is not in the back. So the work that we're doing here with this white paper will be very closely coordinated with a lot of us that work redesign work. We work closely with them, just taking a look at what their scope was, making sure the work is complementary. Also, last month, we approved us authorized team actually put up an RFP for the regional cost analysis. I got another effort that we're going to work forward with, make sure all three are really in sync with each other. And this will include extensive coordination with all of your staff. We work on a regular basis on many issues, so we're taking into consideration their experience, their knowledge. And as we go along with this recommendation implemented, there'll be very key touch points with a lot of activity as well as next slide. Already these current challenges about the challenges that you're going to be facing when after that 524. As Renee mentioned, there's roles. Some of them they're going to go well beyond that much going forward. The part that was earlier is pretty sobering when you look at some of the deficit numbers down the road potentially. So what we would like to do is to put together a working group to look at and we'll new financial operating model. What does that look like for Metro? What does it look like for addressing this problem? What are the existing operating revenues that are out there? What are potential new revenues? There's one that Mr. Alcor referenced earlier about looking at that peer transit funding. And that first step of like what are our peers doing? What are their opportunities to learn from that? Also within this, basically making sure they're looking at what are the policies at potentially Metro itself, state and federal law, there's other considerations that would have to be taken into effect as you try to explore how do we get Metro on a long-term sustainable operating plan. And I think it's really important that all the discussions that have been out there in the past is the goal of this working group is to really focus on the Virginia element. Virginia, as we all know, functions very differently than how DC and Maryland does. So what is practical, what is realistic, what is the best way forward that potentially Virginia can help address some of the problems. While not ignoring, we fit into a larger regional system, focusing on the Virginia side of how we help things. Next slide. So after tonight, the work we have going forward, this is a little bit of a process slide. So we'll incorporate any comments and feedback for tonight. As Renetta mentioned, we have a couple of data chapters at the end of the report that right now we're waiting for MTV to release the data. We're working very closely with Metro and providing us other information that goes into the report. This report is due to the Governor General Assembly by December 15th. And we anticipate next month a series of actions that staff will be requesting from the commission. There's basically authorizing us to submit the report by law on time to the General Assembly and Governor. And the other two actions are related to those last two recommendations that are more focused at METC. Basically, authorizing us to use the state's contract to be able to get some consultant support to help with that white paper research. And also some some technical support for the funding working. We have identified initially funding that you approved this year in our budget and our research and analysis line item. And that's the funding that we would use to implement these bits of authorized by the commission. So that's a little bit of a heads up with the three different actions we'll be seeking in December. There are no actions tonight. And if depending on the feedback we get tonight, we will make sure we have a very thorough and clear definition of how we intend to approach it and make sure that so with that,
Just to reiterate what Mr. Pye said at the end there, no action tonight, but it will come to us next month for action. So with that, question.
I just appreciate the safety slides as a couple of residents speak with that there's a lot of different factors that's my thought or comment. I don't think it's the report necessarily, but I think the big interest of it perhaps now that we have the trains coming back, I think there's an indication for the specific service levels. There's sort of a narrative that I think is plausible to develop. goes back. That's in this. Not so much a comment, but I've been continuing to hope that we continue to grow a better service there. So I hope it's how that's probably a little outside the scope of the report. Really appreciate this.
Just a comment, I think I was a little concerned until we talked through it. 0.7, and the focus on reaching. It's not in the written work, so, I think it's really helpful. First, it sounded like that's something they're working on, but especially thinking through the corporate line extension and headboard or distance. Maryland's distances, expanded. I think there's some pretty exciting opportunities. If we can find something, like you said, that fits into the wider model, but it's more Virginia specific. In addition, I think the great love of yeah, I think there's some folks here.
Yeah, I agree, it's great, well, obviously I got. I think it's great, all the relooks, I mean, that's what sort of the theme tonight has been, so, and on that, it's maybe a bridge too far, but on the bus relook. You know, in Arlington, like, and I think a lot of our jurisdictions, we've got many different bus systems running. We've got Metro, we've got our own art system, and we have school bus. And, you know, I think we're trying to think about looking at getting kids onto, you know, school buses and onto regular buses, and we're doing a lot of that actually. Every part of the thing. But maybe that could get possibly tossed into the mix too, but if you're really designing a bus system for, you know, for all of us, those school buses, I think you're part of that. You're sort of smiling at me, but I think this is not shocking. Very good, thank you.
I know on some of the considerations, some of the actions we've had in previous years really dove into the different types of fair products, and you're hitting exactly on what one of them are. Is getting folks to try to get more people on buses from an earlier age, and a lot of different programs that become available. It has one, Arlington, Fairfax County has one. Folks are trying to get people on buses early, get them used to that, work with the school, work with Metro. I think we've seen a lot of success in that. We're getting on something I think we're seeing a lot of actually.
Now, what's the, really started it in earnest this year, so.
Couple things, I mean, looking on next year. And then $1 billion deficit. And unfortunately, I didn't know we can put the. Some point we're gonna have to, if we don't do something. We're gonna be able to, 30%, but. When I look at $1 billion deficit. There's no way, I mean, legally, we can't fund it, correct? Is that part of our legislation?
We can't, Metro can't have the jurisdiction that give subsidies for more than 3%.
I mean, I just.
Yeah, we're gonna need it.
There's something huge. You're talking about.
Yeah, John, there's gonna have to be a very robust regional discussion. Not just Virginia discussion, but in DC and Maryland.
Good thing,
And
I guess the question I have, I should know the answer. Do we have it in our legislative practice? Make the 3% gap?
Not at this time, that was not proposed at this time. A committee, there's a conversation about whether that means something we look at in future years.
I want to see how. Metro can operate. 3% numbers.
So the only thing I'll say about the 3% cap is it kind of cuts both ways, because in a labor negotiation, when there's no constraint, which is how things were previously, then Metro had a difficult time articulating a limit, and contracts and things like that were approved with big escalation because there's no top end of the budget. And And so one of the pieces of feedback we got, particularly from the previous GM, was that the 3% cap was a very, very helpful tool in that discussion to try to control labor costs. But you're right, I mean, when something big's gonna have to change, to be different, and we've been talking a lot about that, and we're the only system. Probably in the world, but at least in North America, that doesn't have a reoccurring funding for operating. And we are subject to annual appropriation from a dozen different entities. And for New York and Boston and Chicago, they're collecting, it's a tax on sales, whatever it is, they automatically get that pot of money every year. And
I
then-
mean, it's obvious.
Yeah.
We have $1 billion sparing with them. The other thing I wanted to say, I think, they tried to move some of the metro buses and put it under the county, the last couple of years, and it was pretty much on the backs of the drivers. Thank you. A little bit more on what sexual housing just saying. So I've been here for 3 years and I've heard continuing discussion about the glide path of the increased funding. After 3 years, I still haven't heard exactly what Commissioner Thompson is saying. What's the plan? How are we going to close that? I mean, at some point, we really do have to lay down a marker and say, okay, everybody needs to pony up this, which will create this firestorm of protest. But at least it will get everybody's attention and say, we got to figure out how we're going to do this. So I just want to piggyback on what you said. I would really like to start seeing at least some plans on how we're going to recover this. But that leads to my next two questions, which is, are other systems around the country experiencing exactly the kind of gap post-COVID? Is this just a unique DMV problem, or is this in major metro?
No, in New York and Boston, I mean, you could take the stories in the Boston Globe, not the ones about safety issues now, although in the past. But you could take the stories in the Boston Globe about the MBTA budget and replace Boston with Washington and WMATA, and they would be exactly the same.
And how do they
They don't know either.
An MTA.
No one has a great plan at this point. I think it's gonna have to be a whole combination of things, including, we have to continue the conversation with the federal government. And a lot of
Secretary Buttigieg is aware of all this?
that, I don't know, but
And Michael, if you look at New York, it's billion plus. And that was last year.
yeah, there's deficits
Now,
on letters that are, I think they're a lot
It
like.
could be 2+ billion.
Thank you. A small point, compared to that topic, but maybe related, strategy 6, which refers to local bus service and taking over WMATA. And I had this conversation with Commissioner Alcorn. One thing to consider there, if we're talking about this significant need for funding and the challenge building the political support and will to do that. I represent Central Fairfax County, an area from which Metro has systematically retreated its Metro bus service over the last 5 years. And it's worked out okay from my perspective, my constituents, because the connector has taken over and people are happy with the service that they get from Fairfax Connector. But what that means is there's now 130,000 people in the middle of Fairfax County, not well served by Metro Rail, or much less invested in the success of WMATA as a system. And that's not a unique scenario across the region. Maybe it's more pronounced in my corner of the world. That's all to say, that's one factor to consider as that trend continues in Virginia. That not everyone in Northern Virginia rides Metro Rail or can ride Metro Rail and lives somewhere where it's convenient for them to ride that rail. And a lot of people historically love riding Metrobus. Now they love riding the connector, which is good, but it's not great in terms of building the support we're gonna have to build to fund this gap that we're talking about. It'd be much more difficult for me to go to my constituents and say, we're gonna have to contribute more local tax dollars to cover this gap, because they don't use it anymore. They used to, but they don't. Thank you, Mr. Lodge.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just wanted to, that landed with me because like, it's also interesting though, when we talk about a region as a region, could potentially be delivering bus service more effectively, right? So I think that's an interesting potential downside to that I haven't considered. So I appreciate the point. With regard to streamlining the fare structure, it's interesting to see that in the recommendation. I think it's sort of a new to us recommendation. I know it's been as much because of our new GM. Does anybody have a read on what the fiscal impact of that would be? Is there a way to do it in a way that's sort of fiscally neutral?
Well, I
Because
could, yeah, I could send you the slides from our service and fair discussion from our last board meeting, not the one today. It shows you potential revenue impacts of all these different things.
Okay,
But they're not super helpful because it depends exactly on what you're setting it at. So they give you a range. Yes, I think there is a way to do it. That's basically.
And I think that's, if there's
The pre-pandemic argument to Commissioner Walker's comment was, well, if the investment in the Lamada system raises our economic activity in the region and our GDP. Even after the pandemic, that argument resonates a little bit, because it's concentrated around high volume station. And as you get further away from it, it doesn't resonate. Plus, we've probably invoked that argument so long, it's kind of run its course for a while. It's still there, I think it's still valid to some extent. But I think you raise a very, very good point that we need to figure out, identify an argument that would work. And at this point, I'm hard pressed to.
I think that the answer to that is a hard one. There's two benefits. One is environment, and everyone is free to care in our region. I think the other one is vertical analysis, just using the beltways as an example of benefit of steering, that another thing development. And you know, those are the kind of practical things that you don't convince people of overnight. You may never convince them of it. But going back to what Supervisor Faust was saying, kind of started this conversation. Honestly, we need to talk about this in terms of the deficit, like years ago. Don't in a period of 6 months, certain election season, start convincing people to develop a dedicated funding source and expect success. So we're already behind that number. So, you know, what I've been saying at least, absolutely there needs to be a better solution. But I don't think that even federal solution gets us on the road long term. This chart, you can see the amount of local money going into Metro. Nobody else is doing that. And part of the 3% came from a lot of us have already been doing that. And that's not a new problem. That's not a COVID problem. That is a fundamental structural problem that has existed since the day Metro. And so we're going to get serious. I think the other piece of this Myers for some of the jurisdictions that have high hopes of expansion, forget about it until something comes along with dedicated funding. Because there are so many challenges that have to be faced. So if the system is going to grow, if we're going to stop our reliance on cars, we're going to address environmental impacts, continue the economic success along these corridors, get cars out of your way if you don't use Metro. That's what Metro does. I mean, these are the kind of things that we need to be out of the problem now, like years ago. What I'm concerned about is the clock is ticking. Not going to come up with 1 year solution. So, you know, you're going to need federal help. Most certainly at the beginning, we're gonna need a longer term strategy, and this is a crisis right now that we're facing, that is the time to have that conversation. Because every transit organization is in the same boat, this is not a metro mountain institution. This is folks, we're not coming to you for the metro growth and more money, we're coming to you because every transit organization in the country is grappling with the same question. We are no different. What makes us different is local governments in Virginia have to put a ton of cash into the system, unlike all of these other systems, because we have. And we gotta be happy. I think, frankly, we need to be strategic about who needs that conversation. Because the voice of that message can be as powerful as the message. So, I don't know, sitting here what the answers are, but it's sitting in something, throw it out there, as soon as we're talking about it. These things should be out there, as soon as we're talking about it, if there needs. And it's like this, and it's credible both from the civic and the business.
That's, totally agree, and that's what we've been talking about the last several months. The feds can't do something just for MTA. Because of WMATA, Chicago, LA, Boston. So, but it's not going to be, and I think it's pretty fair to say it's not going to be an outright expenditure. But it would potentially is something that could help change the way they view transit funding to organizations like that. So I think there's a lot of discussion going on at the federal level right now. In that regard. But it's not going to solve the issue, right? And I agree with you. The conversation should have started a while back, but I think a lot of people were not ready to have that conversation because of the state of affairs. We've got to get our house in order before I think people are really willing to have that kind of substantive discussion. I think we're definitely getting there, and we're pretty close to getting there. And I think some of the things we're doing as a board and then with the new management, I think it's going to help. And I think we're going to be able to have that conversation soon. But you're right. We WMATA ourselves can't lead it. MBTC can't lead it. It's got to be something very different. That we've done in the past. So it can't be 3 jurisdictions talking about it and then coming together and try to craft a solution. It's got to be done all at the same time.
We'll turn over the SCAR meeting.
I was going to respond to something just at the end. I completely agree with everything you said. One of the challenges we're having right now is we need the private sector leaders in this region to really step up. And we do have a credibility problem with them. So rely on a lot of things that we case. So behind the scenes, and even not behind the scenes, for the last several months, we've really been engaged in trying to rebuild that confidence for us. And we have to prove it. We have to go out and do it. And we need to keep Metro out of the headlines for bad reasons for a period of time. So that work is being done, which will hopefully then lead to the next phase, which is we need their help and engagement in this broader effort. But you're spot on.
Yeah, okay. Great conversation, fascinating, great points, and actually come around the end, I'm thinking that path. Really good thing, we'll hold to it, because we look at, we might start putting more money in, and everybody else will do it. So I think actually, it's really important part of it, and we need to be kind of moving the line. Thank you. And thanks for
That's part of the agency to the other.
Well, and the other reality, let's just say we made it 5% or 6%, it's still not closing that gap. So, it's a rounding error compared to what the issue. So,
all the 3 and get this.
yeah, I mean, you can already quibble with the number, but
I just wanted to add to, Mr. McKay's comments and with regard to like the environmental element of this and transitioning to EVs isn't going to change all the road maintenance and all the electric grid issues, until the grid itself is greener. And so I think another point sort of in his favor is also like Vision Zero, like we have a federal commitment to Vision Zero, we all have local commitment to Vision Zero. So we will, it's also a safe, I mean, you guys have harped on that, like, it's a safer place to be more often, you are less likely to, you know, get an accident if you're on the metro than in a car, and so I think like these themes, you know, not just talking about, you know, as a choice, but as an environmental choice, as a safety choice, you know, these other themes and long-term, I think, support the long-term vision and support and budgeting. There's one, you know, I feel safer, you know, sitting on a train or on a metro often than I do in a car, and I think that there's something real to that, and I think people in the metro area will respond to that thematically as well. It's the environmental element.
Throw this out there, 2022 annual report, there's some nice infographics to some of the things we've been discussing. Mr. Snyder.
Just one more thing, I recall in the earlier region. I don't want to repeat that. So if this region has also changed, and there are generational change, there are all kinds of changes, so hopefully somebody can really do some surveying about what people are, what's important to them, and how we pitch our message effectively to address what's important.
We're doing some of that. And I know. But I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I made my comment about this thing I saw in the paper about Inspector General and some other things about Ramada, you know, everyone thinks they know everything about Ramada, but they don't talk to the people who really know what's going on. You know, and you know, that's why that piece was disappointing to me, because there potentially is one group who can help be part of an effort to advance that conversation. And yeah, it's so yeah, we gotta have the right people around the table, and even look at our business community back then to what it is now. You know, Tyson's, Reston, that whole corridor. I mean, a lot of that, as we know it now, wasn't there. Who were the new organizations or companies and leaders within that group that we got to talk to help promote this and talk to the political leaders at the state and federal level to really help get this done? The whole group of players.
We're gonna go to Mr. Foster and Mr. Meyer, then Mr. Meyer.
I would just, we, couple of things that are. Some, you have, you no doubt that we have a huge problem that most of the cities, yeah, this, that, have to have a plan. I'm gonna throw this out, and you know, thinking outside the box, maybe, or maybe it's just stepping into it, I don't know. But, you know, our commuter choice fund, there's a lot of money there. Is that, have we ever considered whether that could be a good funding source for Metro? I know there have to be changes made, I know how hard it is and all that stuff. But is it something that is, could be pursued, investigated?
So the revenues that make up that program are legally linked to have to be used to support those corridors in which they're told. So there's a very limited geographic and time association with those. We have funded individual metro routes as well as individual Fairfax Connector and Dash and other routes that go parallel to those corridors. But systematic, having for the system wide, potentially facing the challenges.
But it may be six corridor.
Right. 66.
I make an argument that I don't know the legally stand up. No. I would say Katie's right, you're in Jeffrey, I mean, of course you change legislation. But that's at the federal level, that would be, you know, obviously the national consequences. They're difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Mr. Meyer.
I want to respond to something that Colonel made reference to in the private sector. And to go back to early 2017, as a newly elected mayor, I was invited to a meeting with other local elected officials at the Washington Board of Trade offices right across from Lafayette Square. Well, we were meeting in the Chamber of Commerce conference room with the legislative staff of the Chamber of Commerce and the Washington Board of Trade, representatives from Maryland, DC, and Virginia. The outlines of the State of Good Care initiative with the allocations for each of the three jurisdictions have been developed, and so the conversation was about strategies to get that across the finish line in all three jurisdictions, especially the Maryland and Virginia. And how do we get that? What are the strategies? Strategies for Maryland are slightly different. But it was the richest conversation that I've ever had. Business. The goal and the ask was pretty well defined. And so I think we have to do the same thing. We've got to figure out all of these different options we talked about. Recognizing that whatever the ask may be, we'll keep certain things out, may include things that others may not agree with. And so there's going to have to be an initial consensus as to what the parameters of the ask will be in terms of new sources of funding or a new paradigm to make this happen. But once that's been kind of laid out, I think that the business community will respond again the way we did the first time. I was amazed that the people that were in that room got on board so quickly. And because they saw it in their own self-interest, they saw it as a bottom line economic development program initiative. So our part is figuring out what goes into it, what's not really into it, and build consensus first. And on that level, I think we do that, the future will fall in place. That's different.
Did I say there's a meeting the day after the election next week?
So, part of the annual event that the Board of Trade and now through the Washington Partnership focus on transportation. So they have their annual meeting this now finally back in person. I believe it's called in the city the day after the election. And so that's a little bit more of a panel, but it brings in, leaders. I'm pretty sure that name probably is on
Yeah, it's
that
the
panel.
Secretary's transportation. Or no, is the governor?
It's on the top of my mind.
Yeah,
It's on my agenda.
Maybe it's not gonna end with
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Might be a good room together to have a conversation going on the distance with that. But I think there'll be enough stakeholders that are trying to generate.
I would say the obvious.
No. I think you're completely right. There needs to be a trusted communicator. And they're looking down at our stakeholders, and there has to be, solidified ask. Ask. Can't waste everybody's time. To try to figure that out. So, yeah, very robust conversation as always with Ramada. I think if everybody's comfortable, I'm going to move us to the next item. Say number 6, we're going to be looking at the report from the chair of the Legislative and Policy Committee, and Mr. Meyer.
Kind of a segue into that. Our committee met on September 29, and we had a working draft for the legislative agenda. And since then, 2 more items have been added to the agenda. And so I'm going to have a walk through the agenda and especially highlight the.
Happy to do so, and in fact, we did put it right in front of you as well, sort of a highlighted version, because we do have a number of different things within our legislative agenda that we continue year to year. A big part is always about protecting the funding, whether it be the dedicated capital funding for VRE and WMATA, all of the great gains in 2020 with the omnibus transportation bill. But one of the new things that we've added is actually, when there was the elimination of the state sales and use tax on groceries, that leads to a longer term deficit on the transportation trust fund. So a new item in here is identifying future revenues that could fill in that gap. One of the things that had been proposed, and I know we talked a little bit to Senator Evans about this, is at a minimum getting in there the opportunity to study some different options for how we can fill that gap. That's not immediate, but that's definitely long-term as other revenues change in the future. So that is a new one. Another new one, that's again, I should say this is at the state level, is something that we had forwarded from VRE, which is helping them with advancing some legislation that would create a direct allocation for rail from mass transit account. Because right now, the formula funding for VRE is rolled into formula funding that is for bus systems. And it's a little bit of a square peg round hole situation where the formula trying to jig it up for commuter rail system is very difficult. That's something we saw playing out with the TISDAC. And so I know this is something very interested for VRE to explore. Is there a way in which commuter choice can have a unique look at the way that formula allocation is done? The other things at the state level are very much things that we've considered. As I mentioned, there's a lot of preservation things. We obviously continue support for anything to restore the NBTA funding, as well as any additional funding for Transform Rail in Virginia, supporting anything we can do to help our localities implement zero and low emission public transit. And finally is continuing to support for the flexibility that we've been afforded to have remote public meetings. So that's what is considered within the state legislative agenda. Happy to take it. Wonderful, great. For the federal priorities, just as it's hard to think, but when we were developing this last year, it was right there on the cusp of when the major infrastructure bill is being put in place. So obviously this year, we're more focused on making sure that those programs are implemented in a way that if any of our jurisdictions would like to play in that federal space, that we basically see them as favorable conditions. So we do have things that continue to go on about making sure that our region has access to funding under those programs. But some new ones to add for this year, as you know, we're working through and hoping to see the final approval in the appropriations bill for project funding for Route 7 to complete our planning and environmental work so that earmark continues to move forward. And of course, Congress has not done their full year appropriation yet. So we want to watch that very closely. The other one, and this is someone going to the conversation we just had, is putting in some broad language, but identifying some opportunities at the federal level to support operating funds for WMATA. I think there are, as we mentioned, there may be some very creative ways to do that. As you know, historically, transit benefits to federal employees has been something, the way in which the federal government has been able to help. There may be some other interesting, creative ways to look at how federal agencies fund shared resources within the national capital area. There may be some ways through coordinated efforts through perhaps AFTA, Public Transportation Association, to work with our other partners like Chicago and New York or what have you. So the language that's in here is intended to be fairly supportive, fairly flexible as to other things that may come up in the federal space regarding a lot of funding. And finally, insofar that we do want to see more people on transit and more use of transit benefits, I don't know how much space we have in this, but the idea of encouraging our federal work policy so that we really are encouraging when and if employees are going back to work, they're using transit to do so. I thought that was important to have that messaging in there. And then we talked a little bit to some of our congressional delegation. I know they're working to figure out how we can encourage federal agencies to bring more employees back in. The other things that are on our federal are ones to repeat from before, obviously making sure that we never see a change to commuter tax benefits. Obviously, there's some long-term structural needs to shore up with the federal highway and transit funding. That was, while we had huge investments with the Infrastructure Act, the actual structure that funds the the accounts, mass transit account and the highway trust fund are actually not long-term solutions. So that's not going to be seen 4 or 5 years from now. So those are the federal priorities.
That, in their consideration of their review of all of these transit systems across the country. There was one additional comment made that made the WMATA system unique vis-a-vis all the others. That is that it serves the nation's capital. I don't want too much over that, except from the point of view of it's a city, at least in concept, that belongs to the neighbor. And so that maybe that would resonate with Congress in a way that is distinctive to our system. And you could invoke either tourism or national security or other ideas that put it into that context.
Well, just, I don't think this is a suggestion for a change your edit, but in the context of federal government, federal agencies, talk about this a little bit at the area, but I think we need to start thinking about communicating to the federal government the importance of attempting to spread out their telework days and telework policies. It's very difficult to run a transit system. Theory is an extreme example, but it's true everywhere, where everyone wants to ride on Wednesday, and nobody wants to ride on Friday. Monday. You're never going to get that's the system to meet the peak capacity on Wednesday, and that capacity is idle Monday and Friday. And OPM issues telework guidance to every federal agency on how they should structure their telework programs. There's no reason that OPM couldn't be instructing federal agencies that they need to prevent a scenario where everyone's coming into work on Wednesday and nobody's coming into work on Friday. And if we don't kind of start having that, we're kind of the only entities that care about that. And if we don't start pushing that narrative, I don't think anyone will. From the agency's perspective, it's not the worst thing in the world to have 1 day or 2 days a week where most people are physically in the office, but we can't run the region's transit systems that way. And the risk for the federal government is at some point, we have to disinvest from systems so we can no longer meet that Wednesday capacity. We can't afford to pay employees that are only running trains on Wednesdays or only running buses on Wednesdays. And if the federal government doesn't work with us on that, they're ultimately going to suffer.
First, we have to get them to actually make it. Yeah, some of this stuff, which would be great. But I, Jim, I agree with you. And you're right, because we are seeing that already. Yeah, on certain days of the week, in very dramatic.
The challenge is there's no federal government when it comes to telework, right? There's a whole host of agencies, all with their own policies and offices within those agencies with their own policies. But OPM could be pushing them to have more efficient policies than they have now.
As one who labored in the field for many years in that environment, it's not just the transit system to get people to and from work. OPM also has a responsibility to recognize that all of these federal agencies have infrastructure systems to support their employees. And those systems are only going to be used Wednesdays and Thursdays and not Mondays and Fridays. So yes, for transit, but it goes beyond that. And I think OPM needs to have a leadership role in their facilities, their IT,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Fridays are going to be tough. I don't expect people to work on Friday.
Is it? Mr. Chairman, it's true.
We should, I think that's a great thing. Should we put something in the legislative priority?
I'm happy to add a sentence, and you'll be seeing next month, but I can add something to that, encourage federal workforces. Federal work policies, I can actually add something to that reflecting the desire to spread out.
I might even type that to be that it's specifically allocated that OPM established procedures so the federal workforce can, what you just said. I put OPM on the ballot.
We are advocating for flexibility of public hearing, at the same time.
Yeah, I'm glad that, I'm glad that it was sons.
It's not across the-
Mr. Bryan, do you mind, 6B, the presentation for the value of transit, both things to come up?
It's all right, we'll go. So what we're gonna do is,
I wanted to say, we're gonna present this agenda to the commission on the second.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And for,
That's it.
so I'm happy to introduce the next item.
Go right ahead.
So in September, we kicked off our value of transit in Northern Virginia to the compost study. As a line of this is an update to a study that we did 5 years ago. And so I was gonna actually give an overview of what's involved in that and what to expect when we get the findings of.
So thank you for the introduction. Happy to talk about this. It's something we're really excited about. So looking at the value of transit in Northern Virginia, as we mentioned several years ago, we did the study updated. First of all, we have a very nice map here. Thank you very much, Sophie, for this updated map that shows the complexity and the breadth of NVTC district and of Erie, Metro, and even our colleagues on County PRGC. The idea is to look at really holistically what is out there in the transit network. It is pretty significant. I'm going to give you a pretty high level overview, so I'm going to have to kick it off, but go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the goals of the study. Actually, a lot of my talking points to lead into this have already been said tonight. They've already been said, and lots changed in the last couple of years. We have the silver line, everything, we have Tony Dark coming along, we have businesses coming in, PREs growing, transforming Rail Virginia. A lot of those different things have happened since we last did the study. So basically, what we're doing is going back to the 2016 study, take a look at it, looking at quantifying the economic value of our military transit system here in the college. Leveraging that for potential legislative action. Obviously, this couldn't have been better scripted. What conversation you just had, and really is pulling nicely into this work. I think this work we're doing here is going to really inform some of the discussion we have over the next year, whether it's through talking about that data finding, talking about all the different policy issues we talked about tonight. This is one of those ones that when we did it in 2016, that was the number that we took down to Richmond, data funding for capital. So updating that, what's changed and how is that economic impact different. Also, it is, again, educating public and private stakeholders. So it's about what the value of this is, how do we get to long-term sustainable investments in transit. Again, in this case, it's not just Metro, it's all of our transit system, all of transit for Virginia, making sure there is a long-term investment. So next slide, it's going to jump here a little bit through what's different this time, what's different from last time. So back in 2016, I focused on the value of Metro Rail and VRE. This time we're looking, including obviously Metro VRE, all of your systems are there, Metro Bus, PRTC will include them to some extent. They do a lot of service that comes into Northern Virginia services areas here. So that's how we want it. We're going to set this rail the entire network. The focus in 2016 focused on revenue to the Commonwealth. And that's still going to be a very big part of what the study is, because that's where that $600 million a year of revenue to the general fund of the Commonwealth came from. It helped us identify where the dedicated funding. But this time, taking a little bit further, you've already hit on some of these exact issues earlier tonight. But yes, quantifying and monetizing travel time savings, getting people on transit, cost savings for folks that decide to take transit instead of drive. The environmental benefits is huge. Greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, air pollution reduction, VMT reductions. Actually, the point that we had a conversation about safety. Transit is safer. There is a way to monetize. So taking that, what we did a couple years ago, adding those other items on and getting a little bit more of a holistic approach to, there are lots of different ways to really quantify the benefit of transit. Hey, we see the benefit here in Northern Virginia, but this is to the Commonwealth. There's a lot of money that goes down to the Commonwealth. We also see benefits here. If you notice, there's something we get into property taxes and taxes to state. This is like a boost to the state. They're going to be a big one down the road. We talk about the long-term dedicated funding to make sure transit is successful. The next slide. I'm going to keep it brief. So right now, we kicked it off. We're actually getting ready to meet in a couple of weeks with folks from all of your offices, from our colleagues at DRE, at DRPT, all of the jurisdiction representatives here, DRPC, et cetera, talking to all of them, starting to dive into what is the data we need, what numbers we need, and they're going to help us with troubleshooting the analysis to get through with it, and making sure that we're making sure that the analysis is defensible and it's reputable. So when we do this in a very public way, we've done it, which I think the commission is saying is accurate and defensible. As we go along, we're going to make sure that we brief the legislative policy committee and the commission when we get some of those key milestones. And we're hoping to have this wrapped up probably by the middle of next calendar year. And so stay tuned, right? A lot of very fascinating information. We'll talk about how things have changed. That $600 million number goes up, and then more with all the other things. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Very excited. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I was just curious, I love all the things that are added in as benefits now, the environmental and such. I was curious, like this transit-oriented development, like all the housing that's being placed adjacent, is that captured by like the various factors?
Yes. I had a call with Larry, I told you yesterday, and actually helped me with some of the points of this. And one of the ways it's captured is there's a land use side, it's local revenue, property taxes, things like that. What that is, this study is going to get out there, similar to what we did years ago, is you would build all this density around there. More people are living there, more economic activity. They're living there, they're paying income taxes, they're paying sales taxes that are all accruing down there. So that captures that density. It doesn't come out exactly as a TOD as a land use side, it's that density uses is there and accrues all those different revenues that go down that state. So it is captured in that part. When you think about it, most of what goes, generally speaking, goes down to the state sales tax and so that agglomeration around there, again, the focus is around high density around transit. That's where that transit benefits that you get to more people that are living there and generate these taxes. So that will be captured.
That tends to the businesses. Okay. So I appreciate that.
Any questions?
It's the annual joint NBTC, PRTC legislative forum. You all know it's December 5. Ends at 8:30. It's at the Embassy Suites, Hilton on Lois Hill Road.
I'd say we actually have in our newsletter, right at the end of it, highlights of some of our speakers. We do have confirmed that Congressman Don Beyer will be coming and welcoming an opening. We obviously have our chair, and the chair of PRTC will be there as well. Plus Randy Clark, Rich Dalton, and Bob Schneider. And so we actually really, and actually Denver Bull is going to be our keynote. And so it should be a really good event. And I'm actually going to go as well. So yes, my picture's not here, but yeah. So far, I mean, we're still really early on, but we're at over 60 RSVPs. So we're actually really looking forward to it. It's going to be
all right, item number 7, VRE. So unfortunately, Mr. Malcolm can't be with us tonight. The best wishes are with him. But we do have Mr. Rockenshop here. That's the
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thankfully we also have Steve McIsaac and Joe Schwartz who can correct anything that I did wrong. Answer any tough questions. We have one action item for VRE. It's action item 7D, which is to approve, resolution 2487 to authorize the CEO to amend the site lease agreement with West Corporation of Delaware. The VRE Operations Board recommends commission approval of resolution 2488. Which will authorize the VRE CEO to execute an amendment to the site lease agreement with West Corporation of Delaware. The property owned by the commissions adjacent to the railroad right of the office. So red circle there, small piece of land. The action will extend the term of the lease by 10 years for a total of $60,000 due to VRE for rent. Green, you will see circle at the center location of the site. If there are questions, VRE's General Counsel Steve Price is here. There are no questions. I'll move approval of action item 7.
So motion by Mr. Waukesha, second by. I heard this Paul check right here, my ear is closer to. Any further discussion? There none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn and Mr. Clemente, both ayes. Any nays or abstentions? All right, with that, the motion passes. And Mr. Waukesha, I'll turn it back to you for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 3 information items for VRE, all of which are in your packet. The first is information item 7C, which gives an update on VRE's pre-fair initiative. Commissioners are aware, VRE was free for all of September and free in zones 1, 2, and 3 for October. We were hopeful that the free fair initiative would thank our riders who stuck with us and bring some riders back and new riders to the system. The good news is we had a 21% increase in ridership from August to September. So a significant influx of riders based on the survey that we did of those riders. A significant number of them were pre-pandemic VRE riders, so they hadn't ridden VRE since the beginning of the pandemic and have returned, and hopefully they're sticking with us. We did do a comprehensive survey and analyzing the results, and we'll use that to inform our efforts moving forward. We also will be continuing free fares in zones 2 and 3 for the remainder of the blue and yellow line shutdowns, which have been extended, and we'll have reduced fares until the opening of the yellow line. So when the blue line reopens, we'll go from free to reduced in zones 2 and 3, which we know discussed earlier with respect to the spring of 2023. So we're hoping to continue to support the region throughout the blue and yellow line closure and continue to attract riders to the area. So I'll pause there. If there are questions on the free fare initiative. The next information item 7D is VRE's legislative agenda, and I won't go through that in detail. It's in your packet. A lot of similarities with NBTC's legislative agenda and some elements that are unique to VRE, so you have the opportunity. And final information item is our system plan 2050 update. And this is the big deal. I mean, I think this is an effort that VRE undertakes regularly. I think given where we are with the pandemic and the challenges of commuter rail, this is probably the most consequential long-term planning process that VRE has undertaken since its early days. So we're in phase 1 of the system plan update, which entails goal setting, evaluating ridership trends. Now in 2050, we're obviously looking at downward patterns, the unequal recovery that we've seen between the Fredericksburg and Manassas line. We looked at 4 draft goals For the operations board, consider the 4 draft goals for safety and reliability, growth and financial stability, regional integration, equitable service, and sustainability and resilience. We discuss those goals. The next step in the process will be a comprehensive market analysis and ridership forecast. So it's going to be a big effort with the BRE operations board and staff of the plan. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Rothschild. Any questions, Mr. Rothschild? Gonna go ahead and move on to our DRPT report. Mr. Google, are you still with us?
I am still with you. Good evening from Richmond. Thank you again for the opportunity to be able to participate virtually. A couple of updates. You have my written update in your package. I will not go through all that. I did want to mention that I have successfully backfilled my old position. Zach Trogdon is our new Chief of Public Transportation. He started with us last week and has really hit the ground running. And so you will start to see him at more events and meetings in Northern Virginia in the days and weeks ahead. Aside from that, we're entering our typical application cycle, and we'll be working with all of your jurisdictions and partners on applications for fiscal year 24 funding beginning December 1st. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and look forward to being with you in person on December 5th.
Any questions for Mr. Google? Looks like an easy night for you, Mr. Google. No questions in the room. And we are looking forward to seeing you later on in December. Thank you so much. Okay, our executive director report.
Thank you. So as I highlighted before, and I'll highlight again, we do have our monthly newsletter. I think one of the fun things that hopefully everyone's starting to appreciate is getting out a little bit more. So this really highlights a lot of the opportunities that both me and the staff had in going out and meeting. We had our public meeting on Route 7 in Falls Church. We had a couple opportunities to speak at local conferences as well as at the AFTA conference. But anyway, so I definitely want to highlight some of the exciting things we have going on here. Also earlier this week, Anne McGreen and others in our office hosted a day-long workshop with our jurisdictional partners focusing on both technology related to zero emission bus as well as regional fare collection. And we're starting to just do more of those things where we're able to bring people in person, which I think is just fantastic. Really, other than that, it's just a reminder that our next commission meeting is December 1st. And so we obviously have a number of action items that we've got briefed on tonight. But the other thing I'm excited about is that we're hoping to launch. The official name has not been decided, so staff don't get mad if I say something wrong, but it's the Nova Transit Dashboard, which is basically an online tool that's going to be really showing how transit is performing in Northern Virginia, everything from ridership to access to transit, and we'll have lots of different drop downs and ways to change things using GIS and other really cool tools. It's being tested right now by staff and jurisdictional staff. But I think it's going to be really a very powerful tool to talk about the story of how public transit is serving Northern Virginia, and it looks really cool too. So I'm really excited that we'll be able to show that off at our December meeting. And we've already talked about the joint NVTC PRC legislative forum, which will be that following Monday on the 5th. And other than that, our financial reports are included in the material for people. So that is all.
Thank you, Ms. Mathias. Any questions for Ms. Mathias? All right, seeing none, just remind everyone with the tech meeting next month, 5:30, 6 o'clock to 5:30. And with that, we are adjourned.